Fenway Rundown, Friday, March 7th. I'm Chris Cotillo. Sean McAdam here, as always. We talked about the state of the current Red Sox on Wednesday, just the two of us, and talking about the state of the future Red Sox. We bring in Chris Smith, a member of our Mass Live team, who you've heard before. Used to come on the pod a lot with me before Sean joined the site, and now it's for a limited time only. Chris did one of his great annual projects earlier this week, writing our Mass Live Top 25 Red Sox Prospect rankings that is on the site. Went up yesterday morning. And Chris, as Baseball America and as MLB Pipeline and all these places do, you took a whack at ranking 1 through 25, headlined by the big three, all the way down to someone named Justin Gonzalez in the number 25 spot. And so we're going to get into your takeaways from doing this project, kind of some of the ins and outs of why you ranked guys where you did. So you'll be on the hot seat today. Welcome back to the Fenway Rundown. I want to start with this. We've heard about the Sox having the number one farm system in baseball now. Some rankings have them one, some have them two, some have them in that range. Obviously, we didn't, as a site, rank 1 through 30 in baseball, but this system, as you rank them this year compared to previous years, doing this exercise last year, just as a group, how strong do you feel it is, and what stood out?
Well, obviously, it's surprising that you can lose Kyle Teal and Braden Montgomery and still be the top, considered by Baseball America, the top, farm system in baseball. So that shows you where they're at right now in terms of talent. Obviously, talent always doesn't emerge into reality. But the big three, as we've all noted, all have a chance to come up this year and make an impact. But the pitching is like, there's more pitching, and that's one thing that Breslow has done is that he's added some pitching. And you see more guys, more pitchers in the top 15 than last year. When you talk about it, and look at like Quinn Priester isn't even on this list because he's not considered a prospect,
Yep.
and he's looking like the guy that will be the fifth starter on in the opening day rotation if Brian Bayo isn't ready. So, you've got guys on there like Richard Fitz, who, was really good in 4 starts last year. And, they finally put some pitching together where, Peyton Tolley, who they, drafted in the second round last year, and he's now their, highest draft pick considering they traded away Braden Montgomery. Just so interesting in that he's a guy that's 6'6", 270, and he has all this potential. They think he can add velocity, which we've seen that with now, like with Quinn Priester and Fitz. I mean, Fitz came in and throwing 99 the other day in a spring training game, and Quinn Priester's been up 97 and 98, I believe. And so obviously they've built a successful pitching infrastructure that has allowed guys to add some velocity. Not all guys can add velocity. But you look at Peyton Tolley, and he's a guy that they want to increase velocity, and he's got the prototypical size of a pitcher that's a workhorse type pitcher at 6'6", 270. And he has great extension anyway, so that's why his fastball can be effective, without the velocity. If you add that velocity, I mean, you know, this could be a really exciting pitcher. So you've got more pitching in the top tier here. David Sandlin, who I didn't have on the list obviously last year because he came in before they traded for John Schreiber for him from the Royals. And so yeah, I think that's the more impressive part. And and I think is a good mix instead of like you're talking about all position players now. Um, you're everybody on your Baseball America top 100 is still a position player,
Right.
but
And I,
they do have more pitching.
and I want to go there to start. Like the organization, I think we've heard from different people that there's people in the organization that think Campbell could be number one in the system. You have uh, completely ruined the story for people who want to go it. But Roman Anthony number one, Kristian Campbell number two, Marcelo Meyer number three. I think that's kind of the chalk way that people look at it, right? I think that's what most of the rankings have. Did you give any consideration to Campbell at number one or mixing and matching with that at all? Or are you pretty, strong on how you had those guys?
No, actually, I've always been high on Campbell, where I thought like he could be the number one guy in the system. However, um, I actually considered going Anthony number one, Meyer number two, and Campbell number three. And I think that the interesting thing about Meyer is like, he has been injured last 2 years, missed, his season has have ended because of injuries. He did some different things in the offseason, like Pilates and different things like that to
Same.
hopefully prevent the injuries this year. Um, but it's interesting with him because like, he could be one of those high war kind of guys, right? Because he plays really good defense. Now, he has the ability to stay at shortstop. Maybe he ends up at third base long term. But everything you hear from Corey even about him, like, Corey doesn't like, say big, say praise players that aren't good defenders, right? I mean, he's a kind of an infield expert and he's not going to give high praise. I mean, when I asked him about Campbell in spring training, he told me what he needs to work on. When I asked him about, Marcelo, he told me like an old school shortstop, smooth, different things, all these compliments about his ability in the field, his instincts, different things like that. So I think that you could make the case that Marcelo is like he could be a better overall player than Campbell. I think Campbell will probably be the best hitter of the two. And, he emerged so much this year because he came into the system as a guy that they felt like, he had elite contact skills and he showed that at Georgia Tech in college. And they wanted him to put the ball in the air more and hit for power. And that was one of the questions on why he slid down, to fourth round, and so they were able to like, increase his ability hitting the ball in the air more, hitting for more power. And at the beginning of last year, they traded some strikeouts for that, which they were fine with. There was more swing and miss than contact that he's had. However, the contact and the power, was good throughout, like as the year went on. Like he had a better, I think his strikeout percentage at Portland was, like in the 15s, which is really good, like 15 something. And, so it was much better than it started out in Greenville. So he's just you look at some other scouting people that, there was one law, I think it was Keith Law that had him a little lower on his top 100 list than most, and it's because of his unorthodox swing and how much he gets, power off of that swing. I think he recently talked to that, Julian about it with Baseball Isn't Boring podcast about some similar
We
people
don't
that
plug other podcasts on here, Chris, so we're gonna have to redact
Jesus.
that.
All right. But yeah, I mean, he's a guy that is definitely like, he's still an unknown, I feel like at this point. And so I mean, all of them are unknowns, but I think that, you look at Anthony and just his ability to get on base to, compete in the strike zone, get the pitches that he wants, narrow the zone. He's just an elite type hitter, elite prospect, and he should be number one.
We talked about the emergence of some young pitchers here. Four guys in your top 10, Perales, Dobbins, Tolley, Sandlin. They're starting to emerge. How the criticism, of course, has been that the Red Sox have not done a good job developing starting pitching, and that's not just in recent years. That goes back to John Lester and Clay Buchholz, really the last two impact starters who were homegrown and had real contributions to the major league team. My question is, how far away are we from the position player pitcher equation kind of equaling out? Because even with the emergence and rise of those four guys in the top 10, it is still a system known more for its position players than its pitching.
Yeah, I think after this year we'll have a better understanding of that. And you look at a guy like Connolly Early, who was actually caught by Kyle Teal at Virginia. A lot of like swing and miss type stuff, and and the ability to strike out people and miss bats and stuff like that. That makes him, I mean, he's been up on the top of a lot of Red Sox prospects lists, 9, 10. I think I probably had him at about 13. But there's some interesting guys, but there's some interesting guys that we see like at the lower levels, right? Like that we need to see what they can do, once they get to, Greenville and Double A. And I think we'll start to see that. Like Juan Valera, is just a guy, and he was somebody that Eddie Romero mentioned to me. I often like asked like Eddie or Brian Abraham, I'm like, who should I be paying attention to this year? Like, is there any guys that are off the radar that I should be paying attention to? And he had said at the beginning of last year, Juan Valera is somebody to look at. And I mean, he was really good. He ended up getting a promotion, and it's just a 18-year-old to low A Salem. And his ERA was 2.35, and batting average against of 120 in his, I think it was like 7 or 8 starts there. And so there's guys like that. There's another guy in the system, Delvinson Reyes. I'm hoping I'm saying his name right, but just really dominant in the Dominican Summer League last year, where he had 17 scoreless innings, didn't allow a run. These guys are throwing, they're not walking many people, they're throwing strikes. However, we have to wait and see until they get up to the upper levels, because, you can get away with certain things in the Dominican Summer League, the Florida Complex League, even Low A Salem, where you're throwing a ton of fastballs and you're getting away with it, or you're throwing your best breaking ball and getting away with it, and you have to end up throwing more fastballs in the higher levels to get guys out, right? Like, so there's still guys that need to complete their pitch mixes like that, but I think we'll get a clearer view of that, like, as this year goes on and into next year. And it's also about drafting too, right? Like this coming draft, they picked a ton of pitchers. Let's see how those guys look. Many of those pitchers didn't, pitch at all last year that they drafted. They just got them into Fort Myers and, getting them ready for this year. So let's see how some of those guys go. Let's see how a Peyton Tolley takes off this year. Let's see how much progress, like, Juan Valera makes. Reyes guy. Monegro, Yordani Monegro, who's like, he had a 176 batting average against in 15 outings, 14 starts last year for Greenville. He's got a big time fastball, but he also works backwards. He pitches backwards in that, like, he has big velocity. He can get it up there to the high 90s, but he's always been dependent more on his secondary pitches, and they want him to be more dependent, or, throw that fastball more. So, they're working on some of those things. I think we'll see a better look, in the next year, that is catching up.
Chris, I want to ask you about somebody that has been dominating Grapefruit League play and conversation and talk about over the last few days. A guy that, I think, trying to think if Sean, you were even here yet. We definitely had Mikey Romero on the Fenway rundown when he was drafted. I guess that was 2022, so Sean, right before, or almost a year before you joined. So it was just me, good old days of the podcast. Um, and he was a first round pick back then, and he was the next California shortstop. And then it was just a lot of, silence on the Mikey Romero thing for a very long time. He's 21. I know he's dealt with injuries and some weird stuff going on. He reached Portland this year. The batting average wasn't incredible. The OPS was a little stronger. Um, and you have him 22nd on the list. Sox Prospects has him much higher at 13th, and he's, a guy that Alex Cora has said in the last 2 weeks has really caught his eye. I think I was a little surprised that he wasn't in Major League camp just because he made Double A by the end of the year. He's at that age where guys start, but he's not. But that has not stopped him from playing a lot of Major League spring training games. Where do you look at, Mikey Romero and where he stands right now?
I mean, just because he's a first round draft pick doesn't mean anything. Like, we look at Devin Marrero, who
Right.
was a first, Colin Vidic, who was a first round pick, Michael Chavis, who was a first round pick, all infielders that didn't make it. And so, I think this is an incredibly important year, and I was actually just talking with Brian Abraham about
And
him.
and for the record, I'll just interrupt with this. Like they signed him under slot so they could give
Yes.
Roman Anthony a ton of money in that draft. So that's, part of why they drafted him anyway. But go ahead.
Yeah, and so I look at him and the positives right here are he just turned 21 in January. So he's still very young. You look at a guy like that and it feels like he's been in the system for a long time, but still very young. He's 21. And so he still has time to develop and everything. But the interesting thing, Abraham said is they're just glad that, he had a healthy offseason and he's coming into this year healthy because that's something he hasn't done the past 2 years. And so I want to see before I put him 13th or whatever, like Sox prospects, I want to see him produce a double A. There's been Trevor Story worked with him when Trevor Story was injured coming off the elbow surgery in 2023. He worked with them down in Fort Myers when both of them were injured. And he says that, he's really smooth in the infield, and he has a sweet swing. You look at what Brian Abraham has told me, he thinks that he's going to stay in the middle of the infield long term and that he's important to them there. But until you can go into double A, there was a stretch of 8 home runs in 12 games at Greenville last year. And then he was shortly, promoted to double A. And, he slugged, he had a slugging percentage of 543 there, but he also had an on base percentage of 257. And so, and that's a limited sample size. I want to see what he can do. That was 74 plate appearances, 16 games. I want to see what he can do at the double A level before we get overly excited about him and put him up into the top 15 again. Because I think last year I probably had him in the top 15 going into last year. So I think that, he's a guy that, I mean, you have to be cautious about any, and as you said, a lower slot, like, he got below slot value. So, we were crazy about, there was what's his name? The guy that was traded for Priester.
Nick
I can't,
York.
what's that?
Nick
Nick
York.
York.
Like we thought he was going to be the second coming, right? Like he was jumping on a top 100 list.
He's the
And
number 50 prospect in baseball, according to Keith Law. So,
is he? Oh,
mhm.
impressive. But what I'm saying about him is that he was extremely impressive at Salem. He was extremely impressive at Greenville. The numbers started to go down. He was coming off and on 100, top 100 lists just because they're a number one draft pick. And just because they have that hype doesn't mean he's going to come into Portland this year and, rake. And so I want to see him, what he does at Portland this year before I put him higher.
We're talking about a shortstop, obviously, in Mikey Romero, and he's hardly the only one on your list. You also have Cespedes and Arias in your top 10. The Red Sox have come under some criticism for taking too many shortstops. Their response is that those middle of the field performers are the most athletic, and if you can play shortstop, you can move almost anywhere. But at some point, there's a logjam here. You've already got Trevor Story, who could be here as long as 3 more years. You've got Marcelo Meyer as a top prospect knocking on the door, close to being ready to the big leagues. And then the line starts to form out the door between Arias and Romero and Cespedes and others in the organization. How do they handle that logjam ultimately?
Well, luckily enough for them, Cespedes and Franklin Arias are a ways away. Like, they're a couple years away. And so, they have the ability of some of these guys, like if Meyer is a stud, or, you've got guys in the infield, like, if you feel like long term you can have Kristian Campbell at second and Marcelo. Those are tradable guys, right? Like as we go on here, but they don't need to be traded, right now because, and as you just said, like, you can always find a position for an athletic shortstop. We've seen what athletic guys can do, like with, Mookie Betts going from second base to right field and becoming an elite defender. And so, I think that they have some time with those guys. And I think Cespedes is a guy that could make a major jump this year. His numbers were really good in the Florida Complex League this year. I'm trying to look, I think he's just 19 years old. He had an OPS over 1,000, and 105 plate appearances in the Florida Complex League. We heard about this guy a lot. And then he had a hamate bone injury that ended his year pretty quickly. And so, those aren't extremely serious injuries, right? You can come back from that easily. And so he's one of those guys that I look at and I think like he could make the leap into in top 100 lists this year. And so you could have two shortstop prospects in Arias and Cespedes, who are both very young. As I said, Cespedes is 19 and Arias is 19 um I'm just trying to like I have them, projected late 2027, in ETAs. And so um, you can see what you have. That's the benefit right there. You hope these guys continue to progress so they still have value, right? But you can see what you have in terms of, the guys, they've got guys that are right there knocking on the door. Marcelo should be up this year at some point, whether it's at third base, shortstop, second base, long term. Kristian Campbell should be up. He's fighting for an opening day roster spot. And so they can see how some of these guys go. And if you have a log jam, these guys can be traded at some point. It's never a bad thing, obviously, to have multiple guys in one position, because that's an area of strength. That's always an area of strength that you can trade from. And we saw that this offseason.
Yeah. Let's fast forward 3, 4 months. What is it, Mark? 4 months to the trade deadline. If you're the Red Sox, let's say some big need arises where you need, I don't know, a bat, or you need a closer, which I think they might, or you need a starting pitcher because someone's hurt. How do you build a good package with this farm system and avoid the big three? Because to me, and I talked about this with Sean on the show the other day, I think a guy like Fitz or Priester would have a lot of value in something like that. But how would you build like a 3 or 4 man package for a really good player at the deadline?
Yeah, and I think Sandlin also has a lot of trade value if you pair him with the right people, right? Because like this is a guy that's hit 101 or something like that last year, or 100.4, and in the offseason, I believe he was at 100, 101 or something like that. He's a guy that they need to, figure out like, why is there so much contact when you're such a hard thrower and stuff like that. But getting to where you're at, like those guys do have value, and there's a lot of depth starting pitching, which the Red Sox have not had in previous years. So they could afford like, to trade a Quinn Priester or a Richard Fitz, or a David Sandlin. All these guys too, like their value is only increasing as, they're throwing, 100 miles per hour in the upper 90s, because it's interesting what Garrett Crochet told me this year. Like he didn't feel any pressure last year and his first year starting, because he knew that at the worst, his floor was as a successful major league reliever with high end velocity. All right. And so they get a look at these guys. The floor of some of these guys is a pretty good reliever with high end velocity. And so those guys, and then you look at, Luis Perales, who's number 5 on the list and coming off Tommy John surgery. He wants to be back at some point during the second half this year. So he's still number 5 in the system. These two shortstop prospects, as I said, you can wait on them to trade them, or you can, deal them now as part of a prospect, package that doesn't include the big three. As I said, Cespedes is the guy to watch this year in terms of really increasing his stock. It's actually, I wrote a story at the GM meetings before they got Crochet, a month before they got Crochet or whatever, and he was somebody that I added that had value, that they could deal. And, Arias has value. And so there's a lot of guys with value, that you could pair with one of those, even those high end velocity guys. And so They definitely, I mean, they're the number one farm system in baseball. We'll see how that actually plays out, like if Baseball America is right about that. But when you're the number one farm system, you can definitely pair some guys together and get a deal done for, to get somebody in the at the deadline.
That's after giving up 7 prospects for Lucas Sims and Danny Jansen. I mean, for Luis Garcia and Danny Jansen
Well, you
somehow.
also look at it like I added in this story, like not only did they give up Braden Montgomery and they gave up
Teal.
Kyle Teal, but I mean, you look at Chase Mydroth, and he was on everybody's list as a top 10 Red Sox prospect.
Yeah.
So,
And Gonzalez used to be too, right? I
yeah,
mean,
and
he
so
was,
like he's still a hard thrower that, the only thing that he needs to do is throw more strikes and he'll be a really, he could be a very good reliever in this league. And so they lost a lot and they're still number one.
If we're talking position by position, we address the fact that there are a lot of shortstops. Conversely, particularly after the trade of Kyle Teal, they are very thin catching wise. There is Jonathan Garcia, who had the knee injury last year, younger brother of. He's on the list, but there's not a whole lot there. And people look at the next few years and say, is Connor Wong it for the next couple of years? Who could contribute here? Where are they catching wise in the system?
That's what they need to, I think that they need to look into in trades and free agency. Like we talk about, having a lot of middle infielders. Well, maybe they can, I'm not saying that they're going to get the guy that the Orioles have like the sixth best catching prospect in baseball or something when they already have one of the best catchers in baseball, right? So like there should be some opportunities that come, not that they would do it with the Red Sox and trade within their, top tier prospect within their own division. But what I'm saying is you have to start looking at this point, um, like upcoming free agents, what you can get, for a long-term catcher, in trade. Because, when you look at it, I think that we all said last year, like, is Connor Wong kind of got tired and tailed off a little bit and wasn't as good as defensively as the year prior. He's probably your long-term backup to Kyle Teal. And so they don't have a long-term, like, we'll see what Wong does. Maybe he's got a better stance this year, like a more, what is, how do they explain it? A more simple stance, behind the plate and different things like that. And they think that he can be a better defensive catcher. And he's extremely athletic. And he showed in 2023 that he can be pretty good behind the plate at times. Um, so I look at it as that's a position that they need to really focus on looking in the trade market, in free agency, different things like that, because they don't have luck. Garcia, the passwords brother, as you mentioned him, like, he's extremely good. Like he's got a lot of potential. When I say extremely good, we'll see how he is as he moves up the system. But and he's still extremely young, but he's a long ways away. You don't have anybody right there at catcher that, like you did with Kyle Teal that will, projected to come up in 2025 and help the big league team, or even in 2026 for that matter. And so that's definitely a position they need to start looking externally that they need to address.
When the Phillies are horrible at the trade deadline, somehow they're going to go out and get Realmuto and call it their big splash. That's my boldest not coming true prediction for the year. I just tweeted this, but breaking news on the show. Uh, if Johnston's son Garcia is the password, the younger brother Johan Fran, let's say, we're gonna go with the username. That's his new nickname that he's being anointed with today. So that is the breaking news on today's pod. Smith, we'll end with this. Your last question on your great rankings. Again, everyone go check
Well,
it out on the.
sometimes I don't like to call players by their nicknames. However, this is a media-driven nickname to
That's true.
begin with,
And
password.
you don't know how to
So I feel
pronounce
like it's
the
fair
first
game.
name anyway.
As a media member, I feel like because it's media-driven nickname and because it's impossible nickname for me to say because I have trouble with the easiest of names, like that I think that I have the like he's the one guy I can call by his nickname and it's fair game.
All right, Smith, last question for you before we wrap. I want to ask you this because every year you are higher on some guys than the industry, you're lower on others than the industry. Last year you were higher on Kristian Campbell than a lot of people, so big claps for you for that. You did have him 21st, 25th in the system, not first or second, so we can't give you that much credit, but
No
alas,
one even had them on his top 30, and I really didn't brag during the season. So
that's true, but I can
that's
do it.
shows.
So, I saw there's a few guys who are a few spots off. We talked about you're a little lower on Romero than some people. Um, who are, let's say two guys, rapid fire version here that you are higher or way higher than everybody else, and two guys you're lower on.
So it's funny because I used the same approach last year with my number 25 guy. My last guy I was like, let's look at somebody that most people don't have, but I like a lot. And so I picked, Gonzalez as the number 25 guy. And I was like really high on that. I was like, yeah, that's gonna be awesome and everything. And then like 2 days before I put out my list, MLB Pipeline Red Sox ranked him 15th. And I'm like, oh, this, they stole my thunder. I was really
And
upset.
they're more bullish somehow.
Yeah. So like he's really interesting guy, Justin Gonzalez, an 18-year-old first baseman outfielder. He's already, 6'5", his parents are 6'4" and 6'3", so he's probably gonna end up being like 6'8" or something like that. He's still growing. Um, he's a guy that had really good bat speed, that he showed and big exit velocities and all that uh in the Dominican Summer League. So that's somebody that could make a big jump this year that like is at the end of my list that could make a big jump like Campbell did. I think Nelly Taylor, who I put 24th, very interesting guy. He's put on some weight in the offseason. You saw him slump with the bat a lot last year, but all like I actually talked to this kid in Instructs in 2023, and he's a big Jackie Bradley guy. Like he wants to be compared to that, defensively and stuff. And so all I've heard is he's one of the best, if not the best defensive players, outfielders in their minor league system. And, he gets the balls really well. And so if he can hit a little bit more, and he showed that during the second half last year. He hit in Greenville, I think it was 894 OPS in his final, 10 games or whatever. But, he had also hit very well at Low A Salem in the month of August. And so that's a guy that we could see that, isn't probably on many of these lists that, makes a jump. Conrad Kaysen, the two-way player is extremely fascinating this year. I had him at 21. Some people think that he's more of a pitcher than a position player. Some people think he's more of a position player than a pitcher. Just reading scouting reports on him and hearing what some people say, I think he's probably more of a pitcher at this point. Then I don't know how he's going to develop as a hitter going forward, but they're going to use him both ways to start off. They're going to see what he's best at, and if he's great at both, maybe they keep him at both. I'm sure they wish they maybe did that with Trey Ball, back in the day when he was somebody
That
that,
was a lost cause regardless, but go ahead.
well, but he was considered somebody that like they picked seventh overall and people thought as a seventh overall pick, he could have been an outfielder and some thought he could have been a pitcher. And so like, you start him off, see what he can do at both, and he'll probably eventually find a home. He probably won't be Otani. And I would say that pitching is his home, but we'll see. So yeah, there are some interesting guys
What
there.
about two on the other side?
So I mean, Miguel Blaze, he dropped, and I think that,
You had him where, like 11?
yeah, and he was a top 100 prospect before the shoulder injury that he had in 2023, and he came back last year and he struggled with the bat. But they feel like I think he spent most of his time in Fort Myers this offseason. He made some really good adjustments with his swing. They feel like, we'll see once it comes into the season. But he's a fast guy. I think he stole over 30 bases last year. If he starts hitting he can become that prospect again. But I think that I'm not the only one that, is putting him down on lists as opposed to a year ago or 2 years ago. And so, he's one guy that needs to prove that he can get back up there. Another guy that people are high on, I'll give you a second one, Alan Castro. I have him at, I'm trying to look here, 17th. Um, he's another guy like he turns 22 on May 24th. And so really good like strike zone discipline, and like he has the potential to hit for power. But when he went up to Portland last year, his numbers were not very good. And so I need to see him do it at Portland. He started off pretty good at Greenville, but when he went to Portland, his numbers just weren't that good. So I think some people have him, higher than 17th. I think maybe Baseball America has him in the 12, 13 range or even higher. But at this point, I just need to see more from that guy.
That is Chris Smith, fresh off his top 25 prospect rankings on Mass Live. Again, check it out on the site. I know it took a long time. We appreciate you, Smith, coming on and sharing all of your thoughts with us today.
Excellent job.
Oh,
And
one more. Can I just
go
mention
ahead.
Sure.
Luis Guerrero? I have him. I just was going through the list, and I have him a lot higher than anybody has him at
Because you
15.
think he's going to be the closer this year.
I don't think he's necessarily going to be the closer this year, but I think we saw him pitch 10 outings last year, or 9 outings, 10 innings of, that he didn't allow a run. And if his fastball, if more than just his fastball comes into, it gets going, that he can be a real arm out of the bullpen. And, I like to look at some guys that have actually proven something already in the majors, right? To put on a list, you can put in like, a guy that's done, that did a great job at the Florida Complex League last year. But if Guerrero's been doing it at Worcester, and his walk rate significantly decreased during the second half of the year, and that was the thing that was really holding him back as a pitcher and why he didn't get up till September of last year. If he can throw strikes, he's got the velo. And if his secondary pitches play, then that's why I put him up there. So that's another guy that I jumped up higher than some people.
There you go. Sean will be in Fort Myers this time tomorrow, almost. And Chris, you will be there when? Tuesday? Wednesday?
Tuesday, I think it is.
Tuesday. So they will have coverage, hashtag team coverage from the ground in Fort Myers next week after a stopover at the ACC tournament. I will be back the week after. So lots of good coverage coming on the site, the pod, and everywhere else.